The rattle of the stagecoach wheels against the hard-packed dirt road was the only sound that drowned out Hannah Lawrence's pounding heart as she clutched her worn leather valise to her chest, the letter from Isaac Anderson feeling like it weighed 100 pounds in her pocket. San Antonio, Texas, 1875, a new beginning awaited her, or so she desperately hoped. The oppressive summer heat pressed down on the stagecoach as it rolled through the dusty streets, the buildings growing more sparse as they traveled away from the heart of the bustling cattle town. Hannah shifted in her seat, smoothing down her blue traveling dress, a garment she'd sewn herself for this very journey from Philadelphia. "Last stop before the Anderson Ranch, miss," the driver called back, his voice rough from years of dust and tobacco. "About another mile out." Hannah nodded, though he couldn't see her. Her throat felt too dry to speak. The advertisement she'd answered 3 months ago was simple. "Hardworking rancher seeks bride of good character and sturdy constitution. Passage paid." The correspondence that followed had been brief but promising. Isaac Anderson seemed honest, if not particularly poetic in his letters. What those letters hadn't mentioned was the vastness of Texas, the unforgiving landscape that stretched endlessly before her. Hannah had left behind everything: her position as a seamstress, the cramped apartment she'd shared with 3 other working girls, and the memory of parents lost to influenza 2 winters past. At 22, she had no family left to keep her in Philadelphia, and the promise of a home, perhaps even love someday, had been enough to make her risk everything. The stagecoach lurched to a halt at a crossroads marked by nothing more than a weather-beaten sign pointing toward the Anderson Ranch. The driver hopped down and opened the door. "This is as far as I go, madam. Mr. Anderson usually meets his visitors here." Hannah stepped down from the coach, her legs trembling slightly after the long journey. "Thank you," she managed, accepting her trunk as the driver unloaded it from the roof. "Good luck to you, miss." The man tipped his hat, giving her a look that seemed almost pitying before climbing back onto his perch. The stagecoach rattled away, leaving Hannah alone with her belongings on the dusty road. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly. Hannah moved to the scant shade of a scraggly mesquite tree and set her valise atop her trunk. Minutes stretched into a quarter hour, then half. No rider appeared on the horizon. Sweat trickled down her back, and she began to wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake. Just as panic started to rise in her chest, a cloud of dust appeared in the distance. Hannah straightened her posture and patted her hair, ensuring the long chestnut waves were still neatly pinned despite the journey. First impressions mattered, her mother had always said. As the rider drew closer, Hannah could make out the silhouette of a man on horseback. He rode tall in the saddle, and when he finally reached her, he dismounted with the easy grace of someone who'd spent his life on horseback. "Miss Lawrence." His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that hadn't been evident in his letters. Hannah nodded, extending her hand. "Yes, Mr. Anderson, it's a pleasure to finally meet you." Isaac Anderson removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting against bright Texas days. He was not handsome in the conventional sense, with a nose that had clearly been broken at least once, and a scar that ran along his jawline, but his eyes, a clear, striking blue, held a steadiness that Hannah found instantly reassuring. "The pleasure is mine, Miss Lawrence." He took her hand briefly, his calloused palm rough against her skin. "I apologize for the delay. Had a steer break through the north fence line." He glanced at her trunk. "Let me secure your belongings to Tornado here, and we can make our way to the ranch before sunset." Hannah watched as he efficiently tied her trunk to the back of his saddle. "Tornado?" she inquired, looking at the dappled gray horse. Isaac's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Named him during a particularly bad storm when he was a colt. Nearly got himself killed running wild. Seemed fitting." He helped Hannah up onto the horse, then mounted behind her. The proximity was startling. She could feel the solid wall of his chest against her back, his arms on either side as he took the reins. It was more intimate than any contact she'd had with a man before, and she felt her cheeks flush. "It's about 40 minutes to the ranch. Isaac said, seemingly oblivious to her discomfort. Hold on. The ride passed largely in silence, with Isaac occasionally pointing out landmarks or boundaries of his property. The Anderson Ranch was larger than Hannah had imagined, sprawling across rolling hills with patches of oak and mesquite breaking up the grasslands. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing. It's beautiful, she said honestly. It's hard work, Isaac replied, but it's a good life. As they crested a hill, a ranch house came into view. It wasn't grand, but it was substantial, a two-story wooden structure with a wide porch wrapping around the front, a barn and several outbuildings nearby. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Hannah could make out a vegetable garden to one side. Home, Isaac said simply, guiding Tornado down the path. As they approached, the front door of the house swung open, and an older woman stepped onto the porch. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her expression as she watched their approach was equally severe. That's Mrs. Abernathy, Isaac explained. She's kept house for me since my parents passed. Been preparing for your arrival. When they reached the house, Isaac dismounted first, then reached up to help Hannah down. Mrs. Abernathy watched the interaction with narrowed eyes. Mrs. Abernathy, this is Miss Hannah Lawrence, Isaac said, his tone formal. Miss Lawrence, Mrs. Abernathy. The older woman gave a curt nod. Dinner will be ready in an hour. I've prepared the guest room. Hannah's heart sank slightly. The guest room. But before she could dwell on it, Isaac spoke. Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy. I'll show Miss Lawrence around while you finish with dinner. Isaac carried Hannah's trunk into the house, leading her through a comfortable sitting room with well-worn furniture that spoke of utility rather than fashion. The house was clean and well-kept, if sparse in decoration. Your room is upstairs, Isaac said, heading toward a wooden staircase. I thought you might want some privacy until. He trailed off, and Hannah understood the unspoken words, until they were married. The propriety was both touching and a relief. The guest room was simple but pleasant, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a small dresser, and a washstand. A window overlooked the corral and the rolling grasslands beyond. It's lovely, Hannah said, genuinely appreciative after months in her cramped Philadelphia quarters. Isaac set down her trunk and lingered awkwardly in the doorway. I'll let you get settled. Dinner in an hour, like Mrs. Abernathy said. After he left, Hannah sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. She was hundreds of miles from everything familiar, in the home of a man she barely knew, preparing to become his wife. The enormity of it pressed down on her, and she allowed herself one moment of doubt before squaring her shoulders. She had made her choice. Now she would make the best of it. Dinner was a quiet affair with Mrs. Abernathy serving beef stew and cornbread before retreating to the kitchen, leaving Hannah and Isaac alone at the table. The food is delicious, Hannah offered, trying to break the silence. Isaac nodded. Mrs. Abernathy is a fine cook, though she'll be returning to her sister's place in town once you're settled. Hannah took a sip of water. I'm a fair cook myself. My mother taught me. That's good. Isaac seemed to struggle for words. I should probably tell you more about the ranch. We run about 300 head of cattle, mostly longhorns. I have 2 hired hands brothers, Thomas and James Hawkins. They bunk in the room above the stable. There's a creek that runs through the property, never runs dry even in summer. The garden supplies most of our vegetables. He continued with practical details, and Hannah listened attentively, asking questions when appropriate. As the meal progressed, she noticed Isaac gradually relaxing, his sentences becoming less clipped. And what about family? Hannah ventured finally. You mentioned your parents had passed. A shadow crossed Isaac's face. Yes, 5 years ago. Cholera took them both within days of each other. I have a younger sister, Elizabeth, but she's married to a banker in Houston, visits at Christmas. I'm sorry for your loss, Hannah said softly. I lost my parents to influenza 2 years ago. Isaac met her eyes across the table, and for a moment there was a connection in their shared grief. It's hard, he said simply, being the one left behind. After dinner, Isaac excused himself to check on the livestock, leaving Hannah to unpack her meager belongings. As she hung her dresses in the small wardrobe, Mrs. Abernathy appeared in the doorway. So you're the bride. the older woman said, her tone making the words sound like an accusation. Hannah straightened. Yes, I am. Mrs. Abernathy's lips thinned. Mr. Anderson is a good man. Too good, some might say, trusting. Hannah felt a flare of indignation. I have no intention of betraying that trust, Mrs. Abernathy. City girls often find ranch life challenging, Mrs. Abernathy continued as if Hannah hadn't spoken. The isolation, the work, the lack of society. I'm not afraid of hard work, Hannah replied evenly. And I didn't have much society in Philadelphia, working 14 hours a day as a seamstress. Something in Mrs. Abernathy's expression shifted slightly. We'll see. She turned to leave but paused. The preacher comes through on the third Sunday of each month. That's when Mr. Anderson planned the wedding, I believe. Thank you for letting me know, Hannah said, determined to remain polite despite the woman's clear disapproval. That night, Hannah lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the Texas night so different from the city noises she was accustomed to. Crickets chirped outside her window, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The house creaked and settled around her, and occasionally she could hear Isaac moving about in his room down the hall. Tomorrow would be her first full day at the Anderson Ranch. Her first day working toward building a life here with a man she barely knew. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Hannah rose early the next morning, dressing in one of her simpler dresses and pinning her hair in a practical bun. When she descended to the kitchen, she found Mrs. Abernathy already at work, kneading dough for biscuits. Good morning, Hannah said. May I help? Mrs. Abernathy gave her an appraising look. You can set the table. The men will be in from morning chores soon. Hannah found plates and cutlery, setting the table efficiently. Is there coffee on the stove? Mr. Anderson takes his black. Hannah poured 3 cups, setting them at the places. Just as she finished, the back door swung open and Isaac entered, followed by 2 men who must be the Hawkins brothers. Morning, Isaac said, removing his hat. His eyes traveled over Hannah, taking in her appearance. You're up early. I'm used to early hours, Hannah replied with a small smile. Isaac nodded approvingly, then gestured to the men behind him. Miss Lawrence, these are Thomas and James Hawkins. They work the ranch with me. The brothers, both sandy-haired and weather-beaten, nodded respectfully. Madam, they said in unison. Please call me Hannah, she replied. Breakfast was a hearty affair of biscuits, bacon, and eggs. The Hawkins brothers ate quickly, making polite but minimal conversation before excusing themselves to return to work. As Hannah began clearing the dishes, Isaac lingered at the table. I thought perhaps today I could show you around the property, he offered, if you're feeling up to it after your journey. I'd like that very much, Hannah replied. After the dishes were washed and put away, Isaac saddled 2 horses Tornado for himself and a gentle mare named Daisy for Hannah. Though she'd had little experience with riding, Hannah was determined not to show fear. Isaac was patient, showing her how to hold the reins and move with the horse's gait. The tour of the property took most of the morning, with Isaac pointing out boundaries, water sources, and the best grazing areas. Hannah listened intently, asking questions and showing genuine interest. The land was beautiful in its wild way, and she could see the pride Isaac took in it. My father started with just 50 acres, he explained as they paused on a ridge overlooking a verdant valley. Built it up acre by acre. When I took over, we had about 500. Now we're just over 1,000. It's impressive, Hannah said sincerely. You've accomplished a great deal. Isaac shrugged, but she could see her words pleased him. Hard work mostly, and some luck. Sometimes that's all we can ask for, Hannah replied softly. Isaac studied her face for a moment, then nodded. Yes, I suppose it is. As they rode back to the ranch house, Hannah felt more at ease than she had since arriving. Isaac might be a man of few words, but there was a steadiness to him that she found reassuring. Perhaps this arrangement could work after all. The next few days fell into a pattern. Hannah rose early, helping Mrs. Abernathy with breakfast for the men before turning her attention to household tasks. She proved herself capable and hardworking, taking on more responsibilities each day. In the evenings, she and Isaac would sit on the porch, talking quietly as the sun set over the Texas landscape. Hannah learned more about Isaac during these conversations. how he'd fought briefly in the war before returning to care for the ranch when his father fell ill. How he'd expanded the property by buying out neighbors who couldn't make a go of it after the war. How he dreamed of breeding cattle that could better withstand the harsh Texas climate. In turn, Hannah shared stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her work as a seamstress, and her dreams of someday having a family of her own. Isaac listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that showed he was genuinely interested in knowing her. A week into her stay, Hannah was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when a cloud of dust announced the arrival of visitors. Shading her eyes, she made out a wagon approaching, driven by a well-dressed man with a woman beside him. Hannah hurried inside to alert Isaac, who was reviewing the ranch accounts at the kitchen table. "There's a wagon coming," she said, suddenly conscious of her work apron and wind-blown hair. Isaac frowned, setting aside his ledger. Not expecting anyone today. They both moved to the front porch as the wagon pulled up. The man driving it was expensively dressed for ranch country, in a tailored suit and bowler hat. The woman beside him wore a fashionable dress that looked out of place amid the dust of the ranch yard. "Anderson." The man called jovially as he set the brake and hopped down. "How are you, my friend?" Isaac's posture had stiffened. "Caldwell, wasn't expecting to see you out this way." The man named Caldwell helped the woman down from the wagon before approaching the porch, extending his hand. "Just thought we'd pay a neighborly visit. Heard you had some company." His eyes shifted to Hannah, a calculating look that made her uncomfortable. Isaac briefly shook the offered hand. "Richard Caldwell, this is Miss Hannah Lawrence." "Miss Lawrence, Richard Caldwell owns the Double C Ranch that borders our property to the east." Caldwell swept off his hat and bowed with exaggerated courtesy. "Enchanted, Miss Lawrence. This is my sister, Miss Violet Caldwell." The woman nodded coolly, her gaze assessing Hannah's simple dress and work apron. "How do you do? Please come in," Hannah offered, falling back on the manners her mother had instilled in her. "I'll put on some coffee." Inside, Hannah busied herself in the kitchen while Isaac reluctantly entertained the Caldwells in the sitting room. As she arranged cookies on a plate, she could hear snippets of conversation. "Quite a surprise to hear you'd sent for a bride," Caldwell was saying. "Always thought you were married to this ranch. My personal affairs are my own concern," Isaac replied stiffly. Of course," Caldwell said with a laugh that held little humor. "Just surprised is all, though I must say you chose well. Miss Lawrence is quite charming." Hannah entered with the coffee tray, pretending she hadn't heard. As she served the guests, she noticed Violet Caldwell watching her with barely concealed contempt. "So, Miss Lawrence," Caldwell said, accepting a cup, "how are you finding Texas after the civilization of the East?" "I find it beautiful," Hannah replied honestly, "and the people have been most welcoming," Caldwell chuckled. "Most, perhaps, but ranch life can be isolating for a woman of refinement. San Antonio society is quite limited compared to Philadelphia, I imagine." "I didn't have much time for society in Philadelphia," Hannah said. "I worked as a seamstress." "A working woman," Caldwell exclaimed, as if this were a novelty. "How industrious." "Miss Lawrence is very capable," Isaac interjected, his tone making it clear he didn't appreciate Caldwell's condescension. Caldwell smiled thinly. "I'm sure she is. Tell me, Anderson, have you given any more thought to my offer?" "The dry season's coming, and that water access would make all the difference to your herd." Isaac's jaw tightened. "As I told you last month, I'm not selling any part of my land, especially not the creek access. Business before pleasure, I always say," Caldwell replied, setting down his cup. "But perhaps we can discuss this another time. I didn't mean to impose on your hospitality." As the Caldwells prepared to leave, Richard lingered, speaking quietly to Isaac by the wagon while Violet engaged Hannah in stilted conversation on the porch. "You must find it terribly primitive out here," Violet said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "No proper society, no amenities." "I find it honest," Hannah replied evenly, "and there's a beauty to the simplicity." Violet's lips curled in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. How quaint. "Though I wonder how long that sentiment will last through a Texas summer, or when winter comes and you're trapped here for weeks on end." Before Hannah could respond, the men rejoined them. Caldwell helped his sister into the wagon, then turned to Hannah. "Miss Lawrence, it was truly a pleasure. I hope you'll both consider attending the social at the town hall next Saturday. It would give you a chance to meet more of your neighbors." After the Caldwells had departed, Hannah turned to Isaac, who was watching the wagon disappear with a troubled expression. "You don't care for Mr. Caldwell," she observed. Isaac's eyes shifted to her. "Richard Caldwell is a snake. He's been trying to buy the water rights to the East Creek since he moved here 3 years ago. Offers keep going up, but I won't sell. Why does he want it so badly? Control. The creek runs through my land before reaching his. In dry years, it's the only reliable water source for miles. If he controlled it, he'd have leverage over every rancher in the area." Hannah nodded thoughtfully, and his sister seems interesting. A ghost of a smile touched Isaac's lips. "Violet Caldwell has made it clear she'd be amenable to becoming Mrs. Anderson if it meant merging our ranches. I've made it equally clear I'm not interested." The knowledge that Isaac had rejected Violet's advances sent an unexpected flutter through Hannah's chest. "I see." Isaac's expression softened as he looked at her. "I should check the north pasture before sunset. Would you like to ride out with me? It's cooler now," Hannah smiled. "I'd like that very much." The next few days passed peacefully, with Hannah falling into the rhythm of ranch life. Each day, she found herself growing more comfortable with Isaac, more certain that their arrangement could become something meaningful. They hadn't discussed the wedding directly, but with the preacher's visit less than 2 weeks away, Hannah found herself thinking about it often. On Friday afternoon, Hannah was in the kitchen making pie when Mrs. Abernathy entered, her face pinched with disapproval. "There's a visitor for you," she said curtly. "A Mr. Caldwell." Hannah's hands stilled in the dough. "Mr. Caldwell, did Isaac invite him?" "Mr. Anderson is checking the South Range with the Hawkins boys. Won't be back till sundown." Mrs. Abernathy's tone suggested she thought Hannah had planned this coincidence. Wiping her hands on her apron, Hannah moved to the sitting room where Richard Caldwell stood examining a photograph of Isaac's parents on the mantel. "Mr. Caldwell," Hannah said, keeping her tone polite but cool. "This is unexpected." Caldwell turned, a smile spreading across his face. "Miss Lawrence, forgive the intrusion, but I was passing by and thought I might stop in." His eyes took in her flour-dusted apron. "I hope I'm not interrupting important work." "Just baking," Hannah replied. "Isaac is away checking the herd." "Yes, Mrs. Abernathy mentioned that." Caldwell moved closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Actually, I'm glad to find you alone. I wanted to speak with you privately." Hannah stiffened slightly. "Oh, please, may we sit?" Caldwell gestured to the sofa. Against her better judgment, Hannah sat, perching on the edge of the cushion. Caldwell took a seat opposite her in Isaac's usual chair. "Miss Lawrence, I'll be direct. I've come to make you an offer." Hannah's confusion must have shown on her face because Caldwell continued quickly. "I understand your position. A woman alone in the world seeking security. Anderson seems to offer that, but I wonder if you've fully considered your options." "My options," Hannah repeated, a sense of unease growing. Caldwell leaned forward, his voice earnest. "Ranch life is hard, Miss Lawrence. Especially for a woman of your quality. Isaac Anderson is a stubborn man set in his ways. The Double C Ranch, on the other hand, offers certain comforts: a proper house with modern conveniences, proximity to town, regular social engagements." Hannah's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Caldwell, are you suggesting that What exactly?" "I'm offering you a way out of this arrangement before it becomes binding," Caldwell replied smoothly, "along with compensation for your trouble." From his jacket, he withdrew an envelope and placed it on the table between them. $500, enough to establish yourself comfortably in San Antonio or even return east if you prefer. Hannah stared at the envelope, shock rendering her momentarily speechless. "You're bribing me to leave Isaac," she finally managed. Caldwell winced at the bluntness. "I prefer to think of it as providing options. Anderson is stubborn about the water rights. Perhaps with you gone, he'll be more amenable to reason." "So this isn't about concern for my welfare at all," Hannah said, anger rising. "It's about getting Isaac's land." "Business and personal matters often intersect," Caldwell said with a shrug. "The fact remains life here will be hard, isolated. Anderson may be infatuated now, but men like him don't change. In a year, you'll be just another piece of property to manage." Hannah stood abruptly. "I think you should leave, Mr. Caldwell." Caldwell remained seated, his expression hardening. "Don't be hasty, Miss Lawrence. Think about it. $500 is a substantial sum, more than Anderson paid for your passage, I'd wager." "The amount is irrelevant," Hannah replied coldly. "I didn't come here to be bought and sold like cattle." "No," Caldwell stood slowly. "Isn't that exactly what a mail order arrangement is? A transaction. Anderson bought himself a wife sight unseen. At least I'm offering you a choice." Hannah's hands clenched at her sides. "My arrangement with Isaac is between us. It's none of your concern." Caldwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Very well, but the offer stands. Should you change your mind, simply send word to the Double C." He picked up the envelope, tucking it back into his jacket. "I'll see myself out." After Caldwell left, Hannah returned to the kitchen, her mind reeling. Mrs. Abernathy was nowhere to be seen, but the older woman had undoubtedly heard everything. Hannah stared at the half-finished pie, her appetite gone. The audacity of Caldwell's offer was infuriating. To think she could be bought off, bribed to abandon Isaac. The very idea was insulting. Yet beneath her anger lurked a different emotion, hurt that someone could believe her commitment to Isaac was so shallow. Was that how others saw her? A woman who had sold herself to the highest bidder. The thought was unbearable. By the time Isaac returned at sunset, Hannah had composed herself, finishing the pie and preparing dinner alongside a silent Mrs. Abernathy. When she heard the men's voices outside, Hannah stepped onto the porch. Isaac was dismounting, his face weary from a long day in the saddle. When he saw her, however, his expression lightened. "Evening," he called, handing Tornado's reins to James Hawkins. "Something smells good." Hannah managed a smile. "Beef stew and apple pie for dessert." Isaac approached the porch, removing his hat. "You spoil us, Miss Lawrence." Something in her face must have betrayed her troubled thoughts, because Isaac paused at the bottom of the steps, studying her. "Is everything all right?" Hannah hesitated. She needed to tell Isaac about Caldwell's visit, but not here, not now, with the Hawkins brothers nearby and Mrs. Abernathy likely listening from inside. "Everything's fine," she assured him. "Just tired, I suppose." Isaac nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. "We could eat on the porch tonight. It's cooler out here." "I'd like that," Hannah agreed. Dinner passed pleasantly enough, with Isaac recounting the day's work and Hannah listening attentively. Only after Mrs. Abernathy had retired to her room and the house grew quiet did Hannah find the courage to bring up Caldwell's visit. They sat on the porch swing, the night air cool around them, fireflies blinking in the darkness. "Isaac," Hannah began hesitantly, "there's something I need to tell you." Isaac turned toward her, his face half in shadow. "What is it?" "Mr. Caldwell came by today while you were out." Isaac's body tensed beside her. "Caldwell, what did he want?" Hannah took a deep breath. "He offered me money to leave, $500. For a moment, Isaac was utterly still, then he stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the porch. "That snake," he muttered. "I should have known he'd try something like this. He seemed to think that with me gone, you'd be more likely to sell the water rights," Hannah explained, watching Isaac's rigid back. Isaac turned, his expression thunderous in the dim light from the window. "This has nothing to do with you. It's about the land. Always has been." "I know that," Hannah said quietly. "I refused him, of course." Isaac's gaze snapped to hers. "You did?" "Of course I did," Hannah replied, a hint of indignation in her voice. "Did you think I would accept?" Isaac ran a hand through his hair, his anger seemed to deflate. "No. No, I didn't think that. It's just, $500 is a lot of money." "It is," Hannah agreed, "but I made a commitment when I came here. I intend to honor it." Isaac moved back to the swing, sitting beside her. After a moment, he reached over and took her hand. It was the first time he had initiated such contact outside of helping her onto a horse, and Hannah felt her pulse quicken. "Thank you," he said simply, "for telling me and for staying." Hannah looked down at their joined hands. "I want to stay, Isaac. I believe we can build something good here." Together, in the dim light, she saw something shift in his expression, a softening around his eyes. "So do I, Hannah, so do I." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Isaac gently squeezed her hand before releasing it. "It's getting late," he said softly. "We should turn in." As Hannah lay in bed that night, she replayed the conversation in her mind. The touch of Isaac's hand, the look in his eyes when she'd said she wanted to stay. For the first time since arriving at the Anderson ranch, she felt something more than cautious optimism about their future together. Something that, if nurtured, might one day become love. The next morning, Hannah woke to the sound of raised voices from downstairs. Pulling on her robe, she hurried down to find Isaac and Mrs. Abernathy in the kitchen, engaged in what appeared to be an intense disagreement. "Completely improper," Mrs. Abernathy was saying. "To think that man had the audacity to come here with you away and speak to her alone." "Hannah did nothing wrong," Isaac replied firmly. "If anything, she showed more character than most would have in that situation." "Be that as it may," Mrs. Abernathy continued, "it reflects poorly on this household. On you, Mr. Anderson, people will talk." "Let them talk," Isaac retorted. "I know the truth, and so does Hannah." Hannah cleared her throat, making her presence known. Both Isaac and Mrs. Abernathy turned to look at her, the older woman's face flushed with emotion. "Good morning," Hannah said calmly. "I couldn't help overhearing." Mrs. Abernathy straightened her apron. "Miss Lawrence, I was just explaining to Mr. Anderson the impropriety of yesterday's events." "I understand your concern, Mrs. Abernathy," Hannah said carefully, "but I assure you nothing inappropriate occurred. Mr. Caldwell's visit was brief, and I asked him to leave as soon as his intentions became clear." "It's not about what did or didn't happen," Mrs. Abernathy insisted. "It's about appearances. A young, unmarried woman alone with a man not her husband or kin, that's enough, Mrs. Abernathy," Isaac interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "Hannah has my complete trust, and soon enough she'll be my wife. There's nothing more to discuss." Mrs. Abernathy's lips thinned to a tight line, but she nodded stiffly. "As you say, Mr. Anderson, breakfast will be ready shortly." She turned back to the stove, effectively dismissing them both. Isaac caught Hannah's eye and gestured toward the back door. Outside, the early morning air was crisp, the sun just beginning to crest the distant hills. "I apologize for Mrs. Abernathy," Isaac said quietly. "She's of the old school." "Proper to a fault. She means well," Hannah replied diplomatically, "and I understand her concerns. In Philadelphia, such a visit would indeed have been scandalous." Isaac shook his head. "This isn't Philadelphia. Out here, we judge people by their actions, not by rigid rules of propriety." He hesitated, then added, "Still, I should have been here. I don't like the thought of Caldwell cornering you alone." "I handled it," Hannah assured him. Touched by his concern, Isaac smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his face. "Yes, you did, quite admirably from what I can tell." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of the Hawkins brothers for breakfast. The day proceeded normally, with chores and meals and the steady rhythm of ranch life. But something had shifted between Hannah and Isaac, a new ease, a growing comfort in each other's company. That evening, Isaac surprised Hannah by suggesting they attend the social in town the following weekend. "I don't usually go to such things," he admitted as they sat on the porch after dinner. "Not much for dancing or small talk, but it might be good for you to meet some of the neighbors." "One's worth knowing, unlike Caldwell." Hannah tried to contain her excitement. "I'd like that very much." Isaac nodded, looking pleased. "Then it's settled. We'll go to the social." The week passed quickly, with Hannah working alongside Mrs. Abernathy to prepare for the preacher's visit and the wedding that would follow. The older woman had thawed somewhat since the morning after Caldwell's visit, grudgingly acknowledging Hannah's skills in the kitchen and with needle and thread. On Saturday evening, Hannah dressed carefully in her best gown, a deep blue that brought out the golden flecks in her hazel eyes. She'd taken extra time with her hair, arranging the chestnut waves in a style that was practical but flattering. When she descended the stairs, Isaac was waiting in the sitting room dressed in clean clothes, his dark hair still damp from washing. He stood as she entered, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Hannah felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you." "You look very handsome yourself." Mrs. Abernathy appeared from the kitchen, eyeing them both critically before giving a curt nod. "The buggy's ready, Mr. Anderson. Don't keep Miss Lawrence out too late." The ride to town was pleasant. with the cooling evening air and the soft sounds of insects in the grass. Hannah found herself sneaking glances at Isaac's profile as he drove, admiring the strong line of his jaw, the quiet confidence in his posture. San Antonio was bustling when they arrived, the town hall lit up with lanterns, the sounds of a fiddle and piano spilling into the street. Isaac helped Hannah down from the buggy, offering his arm as they approached the hall. Inside, the space was crowded with ranchers, townspeople, and their families. A small band played lively tunes in one corner, while tables laden with food and drink lined the opposite wall. Several heads turned as Isaac and Hannah entered, curious eyes taking in the mail-order bride who had come to marry the reserved rancher. Isaac led Hannah through the crowd, introducing her to neighbors and friends. Most were welcoming, though Hannah couldn't help noticing the speculative glances exchanged between some of the women. Isaac Anderson, as I live and breathe. A booming voice cut through the chatter. A large man with a jovial face approached, clapping Isaac on the shoulder. Never thought I'd see you at one of these affairs, Isaac smiled genuinely. Frank Miller, this is Miss Hannah Lawrence. Hannah, Frank is my nearest neighbor to the west. His wife, Margaret, makes the best peach preserves in the county, Frank bowed gallantly. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Lawrence. We've all been curious about the woman who finally caught our Isaac's eye. Hannah smiled warmly. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Miller. Frank's wife soon joined them, a plump, pleasant-faced woman who immediately took Hannah under her wing, introducing her to the other ranchers' wives and town ladies. Isaac was drawn into conversation with several men, but his eyes frequently sought Hannah across the room. The evening progressed pleasantly, with Hannah dancing several sets, first with Isaac and then, at his encouragement, with some of the other men. She was returning from a turn around the floor with Thomas Hawkins, when she noticed Isaac in conversation with a striking woman in a fashionable green dress, Violet Caldwell. The woman's hand rested on Isaac's arm as she leaned close to speak into his ear. Isaac's expression was polite but distant, his body angled slightly away from her. Before Hannah could decide whether to interrupt, another voice spoke at her elbow. Miss Lawrence, how delightful to see you enjoying our little social. Hannah turned to find Richard Caldwell beside her, impeccably dressed as always, a glass of punch in his hand. Mr. Caldwell, she acknowledged coolly. I see Anderson actually brought you to town, Caldwell observed, his eyes tracking to where his sister stood with Isaac. How progressive of him. Hannah ignored the barb. The social is lovely. Everyone has been very welcoming. Of course they have, Caldwell replied with a thin smile. They're curious about Anderson's mail-order bride. It's the most exciting thing to happen in this backwater in months. Hannah felt her cheeks warm with indignation. If you'll excuse me, Mr. Caldwell, I should rejoin my fiancé. Fiancé, Caldwell repeated, the word dripping with derision. How quaint. Tell me, Miss Lawrence, have you reconsidered my offer? The envelope is still waiting. My answer remains the same, Hannah said firmly. Now, if you'll excuse me. As she turned to leave, Caldwell caught her elbow. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice low. Anderson will bury you out there on that ranch, away from civilization, away from any life worth living. Is that really what you want? Hannah pulled her arm free. What I want, Mr. Caldwell, is for you to leave me alone. She made her way through the crowd toward Isaac, who had spotted her approach and was already extricating himself from Violet's company. Everything all right? Isaac asked as Hannah reached his side, his eyes darting to where Caldwell stood watching them. Fine, Hannah assured him, though her voice was tighter than she intended. Just ready for some air, perhaps. Isaac nodded, placing a protective hand at the small of her back as he guided her toward the door. Outside, the night air was cool and refreshing after the stuffy heat of the crowded hall. I saw Caldwell speaking to you, Isaac said as they walked a short distance from the building. What did he want? Hannah sighed. The same as before, he renewed his offer. Isaac's jaw clenched. The man has no shame. It doesn't matter, Hannah replied, turning to face Isaac. I meant what I said before. I want to stay with you. Isaac studied her face in the dim light spilling from the hall windows. Then, with a deliberate slowness that gave her time to pull away if she wished, he reached up to brush a stray tendril of hair from her cheek. I'm glad, he said softly. Because I can't imagine the ranch without you now, Hannah. Can't imagine my life without you in it. Hannah's heart quickened at the raw honesty in his voice. Isaac. Before she could continue, the hall door opened and several couples spilled out, laughing and talking. The moment broken, Isaac stepped back slightly, though his eyes remained on Hannah's face. Would you like to head home? He asked. Or return to the dance? Hannah considered. Part of her wanted to escape Caldwell's calculating gaze and Violet's thinly veiled hostility. But another part, the stronger part, refused to be chased away. Let's go back in, she decided. I believe you promised me another dance. Isaac smiled, offering his arm, so I did. When they re-entered the hall, Hannah was aware of eyes following them, of whispers exchanged behind fans and hands. But with Isaac beside her, solid and steady, the scrutiny bothered her less than it might have otherwise. The band struck up a waltz, and Isaac led Hannah onto the floor, his hand respectful at her waist, his steps sure despite his claim of not caring for dancing. As they moved together, Hannah felt a sense of rightness, of belonging. This man, this place, they were becoming home in a way Philadelphia never had been. You're thinking hard, Isaac observed, his blue eyes intent on her face. Hannah smiled up at him. Just realizing how fortunate I am to have answered your advertisement, to be here. Something in Isaac's expression softened. I'm the fortunate one, Hannah Lawrence, and I intend to spend the rest of our days making sure you never regret your decision. The rest of the evening passed in a pleasant blur. Hannah danced and conversed, feeling more at ease with each passing hour. By the time Isaac suggested they start for home, she had a better sense of the community she was joining, of the people who would be her neighbors and friends in the years to come. As they drove back to the ranch under a canopy of stars, Hannah felt a contentment she hadn't known in years. Isaac was quiet beside her, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind shared by people who had no need to fill every moment with words. The ranch house was dark when they arrived, Mrs. Abernathy having retired for the night. Isaac helped Hannah down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist longer than strictly necessary. I'll just see to the horse, he said. You go on in. Hannah nodded, suddenly shy. Good night, Isaac. Good night, Hannah. Inside, Hannah made her way upstairs, her mind replaying the evening, the dances, the conversations, the look in Isaac's eyes when he'd said he couldn't imagine his life without her. As she prepared for bed, she found herself humming one of the tunes from The Social, a smile playing at her lips. The following day was Sunday, and with no preacher visiting that week, it was a day of rest at the ranch. After a late breakfast, Hannah settled on the porch with some mending while Isaac reviewed ranch accounts at the kitchen table. Mid-morning, they were interrupted by the sound of approaching riders. Isaac stepped onto the porch, his expression tightening as he recognized the visitors. Caldwell, he muttered, and it looks like he's brought company. Hannah set aside her sewing and stood beside Isaac as Richard Caldwell approached, accompanied by his sister and two men Hannah didn't recognize. Anderson, Caldwell called with false joviality. Beautiful morning for a ride, wouldn't you say? Isaac didn't return the pleasantry. What do you want, Caldwell? Caldwell dismounted, helping Violet down from her horse before approaching the porch steps. Just a neighborly visit, and to introduce you to my associates. This is Mr. Henry Preston and Mr. James Montgomery from the Texas Land and Cattle Company. The two men, both wearing expensive suits despite the heat, nodded coolly. Isaac didn't invite them up onto the porch. The Texas Land and Cattle Company has expressed interest in acquiring water rights in this region, Caldwell continued smoothly. They're prepared to make a very generous offer for that East Creek of yours, much more than I could afford on my own. Isaac's expression remained impassive. As I've told you repeatedly, Caldwell, the creek isn't for sale, not to you, not to any company. Preston, the older of the two businessmen, stepped forward. Mr. Anderson, perhaps we could discuss this matter privately. The terms we're prepared to offer are quite substantial. There's nothing to discuss, Isaac replied firmly. The water stays with the land, all of it. Montgomery, a thin man with cold eyes, spoke up. You might want to reconsider, Anderson. Water rights are becoming increasingly valuable. If you won't sell voluntarily, there are other ways to acquire what we need. Hannah felt a chill at the veiled threat in the man's voice. Beside her, Isaac stiffened. "Is that a threat, Montgomery?" "Simply a business reality," Montgomery replied smoothly. "Companies like ours have certain influences that individual ranchers lack." "Get off my land," Isaac said, his voice dangerously quiet. "All of you." Caldwell raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Now, Anderson, there's no need for hostility. We're simply making a business proposition." "I'm not interested in your proposition. Now leave before I have you removed." As if on cue, Thomas and James Hawkins emerged from the direction of the barn, rifles in hand. They didn't raise the weapons, but their presence made the implied threat clear. Caldwell's affable mask slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "You're making a mistake, Anderson, a costly one." "The only mistake was thinking I'd ever sell to the likes of you," Isaac replied evenly. "Now go." The businessmen retreated to their horses, but Violet lingered, her gaze moving from Isaac to Hannah with undisguised contempt. "I hope she's worth it, Isaac," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. "When you lose everything because of your stubbornness, I hope your mail-order bride provides sufficient consolation." Hannah felt rather than saw Isaac take a step toward Violet, his body tense with anger. She placed a restraining hand on his arm. "She is worth everything, Miss Caldwell," Isaac said, covering Hannah's hand with his own. "And I haven't lost anything, quite the opposite." Violet's face tightened with humiliation. Without another word, she turned and stalked back to her horse. The group mounted and rode away, dust rising from their horses' hooves. When they were out of sight, Isaac turned to the Hawkins brothers. "Keep an extra eye on the creek and the east boundary," he instructed. "I wouldn't put it past Caldwell to try something underhanded." The men nodded and headed back toward the barn. Isaac led Hannah back to the porch, his expression troubled. "I'm sorry about that," he said as they sat on the swing. "Caldwell's never been one to take no for an answer, but bringing those company men, that's new." "What did that man mean about other ways to acquire the water?" Hannah asked, concern evident in her voice. Isaac sighed, running a hand through his hair. "There have been cases of big companies manipulating water rights through legal channels, challenging property lines, finding old conflicting deeds, even bribing officials to rezone land. Can they really do that? They can try," Isaac said grimly. "But my father was meticulous about the paperwork when he bought this land, and I've been equally careful with the additions I've made. They won't find any loopholes to exploit." Hannah studied his face, seeing the worry beneath the determination. "There's something else, isn't there?" "Something you're not telling me." Isaac hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Last summer, there was a fire along the east boundary, right near the creek. Started in the middle of the night, no lightning, no obvious cause. Nothing was proved, but—" "You think Caldwell was behind it," Hannah finished. "I can't prove it," Isaac admitted, "but the timing was suspicious. It happened right after I turned down his third offer for the water rights." Hannah felt a flicker of fear. "Do you think he'd try something like that again?" Isaac took her hand, his thumb brushing reassuringly over her knuckles. "I don't know, but we'll be vigilant. The Hawkins boys are good men, loyal, and I've got friends in the area who will stand with us if needed." Hannah nodded, trying to quell her anxiety. "I trust you, Isaac." Isaac's eyes softened as he looked at her. "You know, when I sent for a bride, I never expected this. Someone who would stand beside me, face whatever comes our way together." "What did you expect?" Hannah asked curiously. Isaac shrugged, a smile tugging at his lips. "Someone to cook, keep house. Maybe provide some company during the long winters. I didn't expect to find a partner." The word partner sent a warm glow through Hannah's chest. "Is that how you see me? As your partner?" "Yes," Isaac said simply. "If you'll have me." Hannah looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, the growing affection. "I will," she said softly. "I do." Isaac raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. It was a small gesture, but it carried a promise that made Hannah's heart race. The week before the preacher's visit passed in a blur of preparations. Mrs. Abernathy seemed to have finally accepted Hannah's presence, grudgingly complimenting her work on the wedding cake and the simple alterations she'd made to her best dress for the ceremony. Isaac spent long days checking the boundaries of his property, particularly near the East Creek. returning each evening dusty and tired but offering Hannah a smile that made the weariness worth it. The Hawkins brothers took turns keeping watch at night, a precaution that Isaac insisted was merely prudent given Caldwell's veiled threats. 3 days before the wedding, Hannah was in the garden harvesting vegetables for dinner when she heard the unmistakable sound of gunfire in the distance. She straightened, basket in hand, straining to listen. Another shot rang out, then another. Hannah hurried toward the house, meeting Mrs. Abernathy on the back porch, the older woman's face pale with concern. "That's coming from the east pasture," Mrs. Abernathy said, her usual composure shaken. "Where Mr. Anderson went this morning." Before Hannah could respond, James Hawkins came riding hard toward the house, his horse lathered with exertion. "Fire," he shouted as he reined in. "East Creek, Mr. Anderson sent me to get help." Hannah's heart lurched. "Is Isaac all right?" "He and Thomas are trying to control it," James replied, dismounting quickly. "But it's spreading fast, winds pushing it toward the creek." "I'll get water barrels loaded on the wagon," Mrs. Abernathy said decisively, her practical nature asserting itself in the crisis. "I'll help," Hannah said, already moving toward the barn. "No, miss," James objected. "Mr. Anderson said to keep you here safe." Hannah spun to face him, her expression fierce. "Isaac needs help and I'm going. You can either help me load the wagon or waste time arguing, but I'm going to that creek." Something in her tone must have convinced him, because James nodded curtly before hurrying to hitch the team to the wagon. Within minutes, they were racing toward the East Creek, the wagon loaded with water barrels and blankets for beating back flames. As they crested a hill, Hannah could see the smoke rising in the distance, a dark smudge against the clear blue sky. When they reached the creek, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Isaac and Thomas were using blankets to beat at the flames, their faces streaked with soot, shirts soaked with sweat. The fire had consumed a swath of grassland and was creeping toward a stand of trees near the creek bank. Isaac looked up as the wagon approached, his expression shifting from relief to alarm when he saw Hannah. "What are you doing here?" he demanded as she jumped down from the wagon. "James was supposed to bring help and keep you at the house." "I am help," Hannah replied firmly, already moving to unload the water barrels. "And we don't have time to argue." For a moment, Isaac looked like he might protest further, but another tongue of flame leapt higher, and practicality won out. "Take the east side," he instructed, gesturing toward Thomas. "We'll try to keep it from reaching the trees." Hannah and James joined the firefighting efforts, using the water from the barrels to soak blankets before beating at the flames. The work was exhausting and dangerous, with smoke stinging their eyes and scorching their lungs. But slowly, methodically, they began to gain ground against the fire. An hour into the battle, more help arrived in the form of Frank Miller and several of his ranch hands. With the additional manpower, they managed to contain the blaze, creating a firebreak that kept it from reaching the creek and the valuable trees beyond. By late afternoon, the fire was reduced to smoldering patches that the men could monitor. Isaac approached Hannah, who was sitting on the creek bank, dipping her smoke-blackened hands into the cool water. "You shouldn't have come," he said, though the heat had gone from his earlier objection. Hannah looked up at him, taking in his soot-streaked face the singed sleeve of his shirt. "I couldn't stay at the house, not knowing if you were safe." Isaac sank down beside her, his exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "It was deliberately set," he said quietly. "Found evidence of coal oil at the origin point." "Caldwell?" Hannah asked, though she already knew the answer. Isaac nodded grimly. "Can't prove it yet, but who else would benefit from destroying this section of the ranch?" Hannah looked across the blackened landscape, feeling a surge of anger. "He could have killed someone." "I doubt he'd shed tears if he had," Isaac replied, his voice hard. "Men like Caldwell see people as obstacles to be removed, nothing more." Hannah shuddered, remembering Caldwell's cold eyes, his calculating smile. "What will you do?" Isaac was silent for a moment, his gaze on the creek flowing peacefully past, untouched by the destruction nearby. "What I've always done, protect what's mine." He turned to look at Hannah. "And that includes you now." The fierceness in his voice sent a warmth through Hannah that had nothing to do with the lingering heat of the fire. "I'm not afraid," she said, reaching for his hand. We'll face him together. Isaac's fingers tightened around hers. Hannah Lawrence, I think I'm falling in love with you. The words, spoken simply and directly, stole the breath from Hannah's lungs. Isaac, you don't have to say it back, he continued quickly. I know this isn't how either of us imagined finding love. But watching you today, seeing your courage, your determination, I needed you to know. Hannah's heart felt too full for words. Instead, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a gentle kiss that conveyed what she couldn't yet express aloud. When she pulled back, Isaac's eyes were wide with surprise and something deeper, something that made her pulse quicken. We should get back to the house, Isaac said softly. Get cleaned up. Mrs. Abernathy will be worried. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them too tired for conversation. But Isaac kept Hannah close beside him on the wagon seat, his arm around her shoulders, a protective gesture that felt as natural as breathing. At the house, Mrs. Abernathy fussed over them, insisting on treating minor burns and scrapes before allowing them to wash up and change. By the time they sat down to a late dinner, news of the fire had spread to neighboring ranches, and several riders had stopped by to offer assistance with watching the property. We'll take shifts, Frank Miller declared as he prepared to leave. No one threatens a neighbor like this, not in our community. Isaac gripped the older man's hand gratefully. Thank you, Frank, I won't forget this, after everyone had left and Mrs. Abernathy had retired for the night. Hannah found Isaac on the porch, staring out into the darkness, a rifle across his knees. You should get some rest, she said, sitting beside him. It's been a long day. I'll sleep later, Isaac replied. Want to keep watch for a while. Hannah studied his profile in the dim light from the window. You think Caldwell might try again tonight? I think Caldwell is desperate, Isaac said grimly. And desperate men make dangerous choices. They sat in silence for a moment, the night sounds of the ranch surrounding them, crickets chirping, cattle lowing in the distance, a coyote's lonely howl. What you said earlier by the creek, Hannah began hesitantly. Did you mean it? Isaac turned to look at her, his expression serious. Every word. I'm falling in love with you, Hannah. Probably have been since the day you refused Caldwell's bribe. Hannah smiled, reaching for his hand. I think I might be falling in love with you too, Isaac Anderson. The admission felt both terrifying and exhilarating, like stepping off the edge of a cliff and finding wings. Isaac set the rifle aside and pulled Hannah into his arms, his kiss deeper this time, more urgent. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. 2 more days, Isaac murmured, resting his forehead against hers. 2 days until you're officially Mrs. Anderson. I can't wait, Hannah replied softly. The night passed quietly, with no sign of Caldwell or further trouble. The next morning brought more neighbors offering support, along with the town sheriff, who examined the fire site and took statements about Caldwell's threats. Can't arrest him without more evidence, the sheriff admitted as he prepared to leave, but I'll keep an eye on him. And I've telegraphed the county marshal about those Texas Land and Cattle Company men. Seems they've been causing trouble all through this part of the state. Hannah spent the day finalizing preparations for the wedding, trying to focus on the joyous occasion rather than the threats hanging over them. Isaac divided his time between ranch work and receiving visitors, many of whom had decided to attend the wedding as a show of solidarity. By evening, a sense of cautious optimism had replaced the tension of the previous day. The community's support was a tangible thing, a shield against Caldwell's machinations. Even Mrs. Abernathy seemed more cheerful, producing a small package wrapped in tissue paper for Hannah after dinner. It was mine on my wedding day, the older woman explained gruffly as Hannah unwrapped a delicate lace handkerchief. Thought you might like to carry it, for luck. Touched by the gesture, Hannah hugged the startled woman. Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy, it's beautiful, Mrs. Abernathy patted Hannah's back awkwardly. Well, you'll need something borrowed, won't you? And, she hesitated, then continued softly, you'll make him a good wife, Miss Lawrence. I can see that now. The day before the wedding dawned clear and bright. Hannah woke early, her excitement tinged with a nervousness that had nothing to do with Caldwell or his threats. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Isaac Anderson. The thought filled her with a happiness she hadn't dared to hope for when she'd first stepped off the stagecoach. She was in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Abernathy prepare breakfast, when the sound of approaching riders broke the morning quiet. Isaac, who had been checking the corral, strode toward the house, his expression wary. "Stay inside," he called to Hannah. "Sheriff's here and he's not alone." Hannah moved to the window, watching as the sheriff dismounted, followed by the county marshal and several deputies. The grave expressions on their faces sent a chill through her. "What is it?" Mrs. Abernathy asked, joining Hannah at the window. "I don't know," Hannah replied, though a sense of foreboding settled in her stomach. Minutes later, Isaac entered the kitchen, his face a mask of controlled fury. "It's Caldwell," he said without preamble. "He's filed a claim against the property. Says he has evidence that the East Creek and surrounding land rightfully belong to the Double C Ranch." "That's ridiculous," Hannah exclaimed. "How could he possibly prove such a thing?" "He's produced documents claiming my father never properly registered the eastern boundary," Isaac explained, pacing the kitchen. "And he's got 2 witnesses from the land office willing to testify that the original survey was incorrect." Mrs. Abernathy snorted in disbelief. "Bribed witnesses, more likely." "No doubt," Isaac agreed grimly, "but it's enough to force a hearing. The marshal says I have to appear before the county judge tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Hannah repeated, the significance hitting her. "But the preacher, the wedding." Isaac crossed to her, taking her hands. "I know. I tried to explain, but the marshal says the judge is only in the county seat for 2 days. If I don't appear tomorrow, I forfeit the right to contest Caldwell's claim." Hannah's mind raced, trying to process this new development. "Then we'll postpone the wedding. The preacher will come again next month." Isaac's expression tightened. "There's more. Caldwell has also filed a complaint against you, Hannah." "Against me? What possible complaint could he have?" "He's claiming you breached a contract with him. Says you agreed to leave the Anderson Ranch in exchange for payment, then reneged on the deal." Hannah gasped, indignation flooding her. "That's an outright lie. I never agreed to anything." "I know that," Isaac assured her. "But Caldwell has his sister as a witness, claiming she overheard the arrangement. It's his word against yours." Mrs. Abernathy muttered something under her breath that sounded suspiciously like a curse. "That snake, what does he hope to gain from such a transparent lie?" "Leverage," Isaac said darkly. "If Hannah is discredited as unreliable, her testimony about his threats and the fire would be worthless." Hannah sank into a chair, trying to make sense of Caldwell's machinations. "What do we do?" Isaac knelt before her, his blue eyes fierce with determination. "We fight, together. The sheriff believes us, and so does the marshal. They know Caldwell's reputation, but we need to appear before the judge tomorrow, both of us." Hannah nodded, squaring her shoulders. "Then that's what we'll do." Mrs. Abernathy cleared her throat. "What about the wedding?" "And all those people coming tomorrow?" Isaac and Hannah exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. "Tell them to come anyway," Isaac said decisively. "After the hearing, we'll return here for the wedding. Caldwell won't steal that from us too." The rest of the day passed in a flurry of preparations, both for the journey to the county seat and for the wedding that would follow. Messages were sent to guests explaining the situation, and the Hawkins brothers packed provisions for the overnight trip. As evening fell, Isaac found Hannah on the porch, staring out at the ranch that had become her home in such a short time. "Penny for your thoughts," he said softly, joining her at the railing. Hannah smiled wryly. "I was just thinking about how different this is from what I imagined when I answered your advertisement. I thought I was signing up for a quiet life on a Texas ranch." Isaac chuckled, the sound warm in the gathering dusk. "Instead, you got land disputes, arson, and a neighboring rancher with delusions of grandeur." "And you," Hannah added, turning to face him. "I got you, Isaac Anderson. That makes all the rest worthwhile." Isaac's expression softened, and he reached out to cup her cheek. "You know, when that stagecoach dropped you at the crossroads, I thought you might take one look at this place and demand to be taken back to San Antonio. Most city women would have." "I'm not most women," Hannah replied with a smile. "No," Isaac agreed, his voice husky. "You're extraordinary, Hannah Lawrence, and tomorrow, whatever happens at that hearing, you'll become my wife." Is that a promise, Mr. Anderson? Hannah asked, leaning into his touch. That's a vow, Isaac replied seriously. You stay with me and none take you from me. Not Caldwell, not anyone. The conviction in his voice sent a shiver of pleasure down Hannah's spine. I'll hold you to that, Isaac Anderson. They departed for the county seat before dawn, traveling in the wagon with the Hawkins brothers riding alongside as escorts. The journey took several hours, with the sun climbing high in the sky by the time they reached the small town that served as the county seat. The courthouse was a sturdy stone building in the town center, an American flag hanging limply in the still air. As they approached, Hannah spotted Richard Caldwell and Violet on the courthouse steps, along with the two businessmen from the Texas Land and Cattle Company. Caldwell smirked as he caught sight of them. Anderson, Miss Lawrence, how good of you to come. Saves the sheriff the trouble of fetching you. Isaac ignored the taunt, helping Hannah down from the wagon. Don't engage with him, he murmured in her ear. That's what he wants. Inside the courthouse, they found the hearing already in progress, with several cases ahead of theirs on the docket. They took seats at the back of the crowded room, Caldwell and his party sitting ostentatiously on the opposite side. It was nearly noon when their case was finally called. The judge, an elderly man with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, listened impassively as Caldwell presented his claims, producing the supposedly authentic documents that proved his ownership of the East Creek. When it was Isaac's turn to speak, he approached the bench with quiet dignity. Your Honor, the documents Mr. Caldwell has presented are forgeries, he stated flatly. My father purchased the Anderson Ranch, including the East Creek, in 1848. Every acre was properly surveyed and registered. Do you have proof of this, Mr. Anderson? The judge inquired. Yes, Your Honor. Isaac produced a leather folder containing yellowed papers. These are the original deed and survey signed by the land commissioner himself. And here, he withdrew another document, is my father's will, clearly delineating the property boundaries as they've stood for nearly 30 years. The judge examined the documents carefully, comparing them with Caldwell's offerings. These appear to be in order, Mr. Anderson. But Mr. Caldwell has two witnesses from the land office who claim the boundaries were never properly recorded. With all due respect, Your Honor, those witnesses have been bribed, Isaac said bluntly. I can produce neighbors who have recognized the Anderson Ranch boundaries for decades, including the East Creek. A murmur ran through the courtroom at this direct accusation. Caldwell's face flushed with anger. That's slander, Anderson, he exclaimed. You can't prove any such thing. Actually, we can, came a new voice from the back of the courtroom. All heads turned to see the sheriff enter, accompanied by a nervous-looking man in a clerk's suit. Your Honor, this is Walter Jenkins from the land office, the sheriff announced. He has something he'd like to share with the court. The judge motioned for Jenkins to approach. The clerk did so reluctantly, casting fearful glances at Caldwell. Mr. Jenkins, what do you have to say? The judge prompted. Jenkins cleared his throat. Your Honor, I was approached by Mr. Caldwell last month. He offered me $50 to create a new survey that showed the East Creek on his property. When I refused, he threatened to have me fired, said he had friends in the territorial government. Caldwell shot to his feet. This is outrageous. The man is lying. Sit down, Mr. Caldwell, the judge ordered sharply. Mr. Jenkins, do you have any evidence of this bribe attempt? Jenkins nodded, reaching into his coat. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Caldwell gave me this letter, outlining what he wanted changed and what he was willing to pay. He handed a folded paper to the judge. The courtroom erupted in exclamations as the judge read the letter, his expression growing sterner by the moment. Order, he commanded, banging his gavel. Mr. Caldwell, this is a very serious matter. This letter clearly indicates your intent to falsify public records. Caldwell's face had gone from red to ashen. Your Honor, I can explain. Save it for your defense, Mr. Caldwell, the judge interrupted. Based on this evidence and the authenticity of Mr. Anderson's documents, I'm dismissing your claim to the East Creek property. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation of attempted fraud. Hannah felt a rush of relief, squeezing Isaac's hand as the judge continued. Now, regarding the complaint against Miss Lawrence, the judge said, turning his attention to the second matter. Mr. Caldwell claims Miss Lawrence accepted payment to leave the Anderson ranch, then failed to honor this agreement. Miss Lawrence, what say you to this charge? Hannah rose, her heart pounding but her voice steady. It's false, Your Honor. Mr. Caldwell did offer me money to leave, but I refused. I never accepted any payment or made any agreement. The judge nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Caldwell, do you have evidence of this alleged agreement? A written contract, perhaps? Caldwell shifted uncomfortably. It was a verbal agreement, Your Honor, but my sister witnessed it. Violet Caldwell stood, her chin raised haughtily. I did, Your Honor. I heard Miss Lawrence accept my brother's offer of $500. When and where did this alleged agreement take place? The judge inquired. At the Anderson Ranch, Violet replied smoothly. About 2 weeks ago, I accompanied my brother on a visit. Isaac stood then, his expression controlled but intense. Your Honor, Miss Caldwell is lying. She was not present when Richard Caldwell came to our ranch and offered Hannah money to leave. Mrs. Abernathy, our housekeeper, can attest to that fact. Is Mrs. Abernathy here today? The judge asked. No, Your Honor, Isaac admitted. She remained at the ranch to prepare for our wedding, which is scheduled for this afternoon after this hearing. The judge raised his eyebrows. Your wedding, to Miss Lawrence? Yes, Your Honor, Isaac confirmed. The preacher visits our area only once a month. We've been planning this wedding for weeks. The judge looked thoughtful. That puts a different complexion on matters. Mr. Caldwell, if Miss Lawrence had accepted your offer to leave, why would she be proceeding with plans to marry Mr. Anderson today? Caldwell sputtered, his composure cracking. Obviously, she changed her mind. Women are fickle creatures. Perhaps Anderson offered her more than money. Watch your tongue, Caldwell, Isaac growled, taking a step forward before the sheriff placed a restraining hand on his arm. The judge banged his gavel again. That's quite enough. Miss Lawrence, can anyone else corroborate your version of events? Hannah thought for a moment, then nodded. Mr. Caldwell's visit was in the afternoon. When Mr. Anderson returned home, I told him about the offer immediately. The Hawkins brothers, who work on our ranch, can confirm that Mr. Anderson was upset that evening and explained to them what had happened. The Hawkins brothers, seated behind Isaac and Hannah, both nodded vigorously. The judge considered this, then looked directly at Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell, given your attempt to falsify land records, I find your credibility in this matter severely compromised. I'm dismissing the complaint against Miss Lawrence. He turned to Isaac and Hannah. You are free to go and to proceed with your wedding as planned. The relief that flooded through Hannah was so intense she felt lightheaded. Isaac's arm went around her waist, supporting her as they turned to leave the courtroom. Caldwell's voice, cold with fury, stopped them. This isn't over, Anderson. You haven't heard the last from me. Isaac turned slowly to face the man who had caused them so much trouble. Actually, Caldwell, I think it is over. You've lost the water rights. You've been exposed as a fraud. And if you come near my ranch or my wife again, you'll answer to more than a judge. The quiet certainty in Isaac's voice seemed to finally penetrate Caldwell's bluster. The man's shoulders slumped, and without another word, he brushed past them and out of the courthouse, Violet hurrying after him. Outside, in the bright sunlight, Isaac pulled Hannah into his arms, holding her tightly. It's over, he murmured into her hair. We won. Hannah leaned back to look up at him, joy bubbling through her. We did, and now we have a wedding to attend. The journey back to the Anderson ranch was considerably lighter in spirit than the morning's trip had been. Isaac and Hannah rode in the wagon, planning their wedding and their future together, while the Hawkins brothers rode ahead to spread the news of their victory. When they arrived at the ranch, they were greeted by a crowd of neighbors and friends who had gathered for the wedding. Frank Miller slapped Isaac on the back, his wife enfolding Hannah in a warm embrace. We never doubted you'd prevail, Frank declared. Caldwell's had this coming for a long time. Mrs. Abernathy bustled forward, her expression a mixture of relief and impatience. About time you got back. The preacher's been waiting, and the food's getting cold. Hannah hurried upstairs to change into her wedding dress, a simple gown of ivory silk that she'd altered herself, adding delicate lace to the collar and cuffs. As she arranged her hair, there was a soft knock at the door. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Abernathy with last-minute instructions. Instead, Isaac entered, looking handsome in a clean shirt and new waistcoat. When he saw Hannah in her wedding dress, he stopped short, his expression one of wonder. "You're not supposed to see the bride before the wedding," Hannah admonished, but she couldn't keep the smile from her face. "I couldn't wait," Isaac admitted, crossing to stand before her. "You look beautiful, Hannah." Hannah felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Thank you." "You look very handsome yourself." Isaac took her hands in his. "Before we go downstairs and make this official, I wanted to say something. When I sent for a mail-order bride, I was looking for companionship, someone to share the work of the ranch. I never expected to find love." Hannah's heart swelled with emotion. "Neither did I, but I'm so glad I did." "I love you, Hannah Lawrence," Isaac said simply, "and I promise to spend the rest of my life making you happy." "I love you too, Isaac Anderson," Hannah replied, her voice soft but sure. "And I promise to stand by your side, through whatever comes our way." Isaac's kiss was gentle, a preview of the official one that would seal their vows. When he pulled away, his smile was radiant. "Ready to become Mrs. Anderson?" he asked. Hannah nodded, her heart full to bursting. "More than ready." They descended the stairs together, hand in hand, to where their friends and the preacher waited in the sitting room. The simple ceremony was everything Hannah had hoped for, honest, heartfelt, surrounded by people who genuinely wished them well. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac pulled Hannah close, his kiss a promise and a declaration all at once. The gathered guests cheered, and Mrs. Abernathy wiped a suspicious moisture from her eye. The celebration continued well into the evening, with food and music and dancing on the porch under the stars. Hannah moved among the guests as Mrs. Anderson, the name feeling right, fitting her like a well-made glove. As the hour grew late and guests began to depart, Isaac found Hannah by the garden, watching the fireflies dance among the vegetable rows. "Happy, Mrs. Anderson?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "Completely," she replied, leaning into him. "Though I can hardly believe everything that's happened. A month ago, I was a seamstress in Philadelphia with no family and few prospects. Now I'm a rancher's wife in Texas with a home and a husband I love," Isaac chuckled, "and a nemesis in Richard Caldwell." "I don't think we'll be seeing much more of him," Hannah observed. "Not after today, no," Isaac agreed. "The sheriff mentioned that Caldwell's creditors have been closing in. With the Texas Land and Cattle Company deal fallen through, he'll likely have to sell the Double C just to avoid prison." "I almost feel sorry for him," Hannah mused. "Almost." Isaac pressed a kiss to her temple. "You're a better person than I am. I'm just glad he's out of our lives." The last of the guests departed, and Mrs. Abernathy discreetly retired to her room. Isaac took Hannah's hand, leading her up the stairs not to her small guest room, but to the master bedroom that would now be theirs. "Welcome home, Mrs. Anderson," he said softly, closing the door behind them. "Home," Hannah repeated, savoring the word. "I like the sound of that." As Isaac drew her into his arms, Hannah knew with complete certainty that she had found where she belonged not just a place, but a person, a partner, a love that would last a lifetime. 2 years later, Hannah stood on the porch of the Anderson Ranch, watching as Isaac taught their son, little Matthew, to pet the gentle mare Daisy. At 18 months, Matthew was the image of his father, with the same dark hair and blue eyes that had first captured Hannah's heart. The ranch had prospered under their joint care, with Hannah's practical business sense complementing Isaac's knowledge of the land and cattle. The East Creek still flowed strong, nurturing the expanded herd and the thriving vegetable garden that Hannah had doubled in size. Richard Caldwell had indeed been forced to sell the Double C Ranch, moving to San Francisco with his sister after narrowly avoiding prosecution for fraud. The new owners of the property were a young couple from Kansas, eager to learn from their neighbors and grateful for Isaac's advice on managing the often challenging Texas terrain. Mrs. Abernathy had stayed on at the ranch, her initial frostiness toward Hannah long since melted into genuine affection, especially after Matthew's birth. She now doted on the boy, teaching him to bake biscuits and telling him stories of the early days of the Anderson Ranch. As Hannah watched her family, a contentment filled her that she had never imagined possible when she'd first stepped off that stagecoach. The mail-order bride who had been bribed to leave had found not just a husband, but a partner, a home, and a love worth fighting for. Isaac looked up, catching her eye across the yard. His smile, still capable of making her heart skip after 2 years of marriage, was full of promise and shared memories. "Mama," Matthew called, his chubby hand waving excitedly. "Horse." Hannah descended the porch steps, moving toward her family, toward the future they were building together on this Texas ranch. It wasn't always easy. Droughts came, cattle sickened, storms threatened, but they faced each challenge together, stronger for the bonds between them. "Yes, sweetheart," she called back to her son. "That's a horse, and one day you'll ride her just like your papa." Isaac's arms slipped around her waist as she joined them, his touch as natural as breathing. "He's a born rancher, just like his mother." Hannah laughed. "I'm hardly a born rancher." "Could have fooled me," Isaac replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You took to this life like you were made for it, like you were made for me." As the Texas sun began its descent, painting the ranch in hues of gold and amber, Hannah leaned into her husband's embrace. The words he had spoken that fateful day still echoed in her heart. "You stay with me and none take you from me." It was a promise he had kept, through challenges and joys alike, and she had kept her promise too, standing beside him, building a life rich with love, family, and purpose. In the end, it wasn't the land or the water that mattered most. It was the family they had created, the love they had found in the most unexpected of ways. Hannah Anderson, once a mail-order bride with nothing but hope and courage to her name, had found everything she'd ever wanted and more, here on this Texas ranch, with this good, steadfast man by her side. "I love you, Isaac Anderson," she said softly, watching as their son giggled at Daisy's gentle nuzzling. Isaac's arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Hannah Anderson, today, tomorrow, and for all the days to come." And in that moment, with the Texas sunset painting the sky and their son's laughter filling the air, Hannah knew that sometimes the greatest journeys led not to distant places, but to the person you were always meant to find, the one who would stand beside you through fire and flood, through joy and sorrow, the one who would look at you with love and say, "You stay with me, and none take you from me."